When I was a graduate student in Chicago, way back years ago, there were 12 seminaries in the neighborhood, and so they'd got together and set up this Association of Chicago Theological Schools. And so if you were enrolled in one of them, you could take classes at any of them. And so it happened that some blessed student from some conservative seminary found themselves in my systematics course. And this was basically fine up until the topic of hell came up. And this student sat there in horror while everyone in class had a big laugh. This poor woman fell to pieces right there at her desk, gasping for breath and crying. She came to Hyde Park to study the Bible. And here she was, surrounded by a bunch of cackling reprobates who thought the idea of a literal hell was about as credible a place as the lost city of Atlantis. But the professor of the course was very tactful, and she silenced us. In my memory, she raps on the desk and says, "Silence, liberals!" But most of us were all baby pastors, and I think we felt shame and some compassion for this fellow seminarian from the land of evangelical Bible college or something, because there are very few things that are perhaps more cruel in seminary than ridiculing another student's beliefs, even if they are toxic and harmful beliefs. It's not like our friend invented the idea of hell. She was probably taught that as a child, and she was probably in that very moment coming face to face with the possibility that the people who raised her and taught her about the Bible might not have had all the answers, and they may have made some stuff up along the way. But that particular class was being taught by one of the greatest American theologians of the last century, and this century as well, Laurel Schneider, and she ended that class then and dismissed the room to prevent that student any further discomfort. But a handful of us stayed back, because I think maybe we thought we deserved a talking to, and about a half a dozen of us sat there in silence. And I remember Dr. Schneider standing there before us, kind of casually leaning against the lecture desk, looking at us like we'd tricked some other kids into painting the fence or something. And someone piped up. It may have been me. "You can't be angry with us because we don't believe in hell." And she laughed. I think she said something like, "You don't have to believe in hell to know that it exists." And someone else asked what she meant by that, and there was a pause. And then a response from Dr. Schneider that seemed to come from this precise intersection of her lived experience and the sum total of Western theology. And her words were very direct, and they cut through me like a bullet. And she looked at us and she said, "Hell is a closet." In America, we live in a homophobic society. It has been this way since about the mid-1950s. And we are heading out of it, it seems. But we're still in a period of intense homophobia in America. So you can say many things about various societies throughout history. These societies can be religious, or they can be secular. It can be mercantile or agrarian. They can be patriarchal. They can privilege different family structures over others. And some societies and some cultures in history are homophobic. They pop up in the historic record. You can study this. I took a seminar in that same school on the history of homophobic societies. This behavior correlates around some interesting details. It correlates to periods of international conflict around the expansion of empire, and it correlates to growing income disparity at home. And today we find ourselves living through the end of a long season of very intense homophobia in the United States. And the end is typically the worst and the most violent. But as a student of history, the thing that really grinds my gears is I still meet people who wrongly believe that the world has more or less generally always been a homophobic place, and that same-gender love and marriage and commitments have always been forbidden by dominant cultures, and that is simply just not true. It is not true. It's not even kind of true a little bit. It's wrong. Homophobia is the bigotry against same-sex love and marriage and relationship. This is aberrant in human cultures throughout history. It's not normal. It certainly wasn't the case in the first and second century Palestine, nor was it true for most of the history of when the Bible was written. Now, I can rattle off societies that supported or celebrated same-sex love, sometimes between men, sometimes between women, sometimes both. I could tell you about Tokugawa, Japan, or the Han dynasty in China, or in the West in periods in ancient Greece, and also in Rome as well, and in pre-colonial societies here in America. But the truth of the matter is that really, for the vast majority of human history, homosexuality, it just simply was not a matter of concern. It didn't move the needle. It didn't warrant a lot of commentary. This is the case with most of the cultures that are described in the Bible. And this makes sense when you look at the way that history of cultures and societies seem to fixate on certain things. We'd say locally, about 150 years ago here in Grand Rapids, right here in this city, there was a big, huge fight that occupied all of the pulpits and the newspapers of this city, and it messed with the schools and the laws and everything, and they had a huge fight about whether or not we ought to outlaw fraternal organizations, clubs, the Moose Lodge, or whatever. This was a huge deal. Entire sermon series were preached about this in every church, in every denomination. Then they moved on to dance halls. It was a dancing. And then we got ourselves really wound up about beer there for... And they, in each of those cases, they assumed that the cultures that had come before them had felt similarly to them. And in every case, they were wrong. So this is how societies work. So today we live in a homophobic culture, in a very bigoted period in our culture, and it messes with our heads, and it messes with the Bible. The people try to write alcohol. They tried to write alcohol out of the Bible, digging into the words that they were using and saying, well, it didn't mean what it says it meant, there. And they tried to write dancing out of the Bible. David didn't actually dance in front of the Ark of the Covenant. He certainly didn't dance naked in front. He did both of those things. It's very obvious. And today they try to write same-gender love out of the Bible. And I know that not all of you grew up listening to sermons, but I know that some of you grew up listening to a lot of sermons. And maybe you heard a preacher, well-meaning or otherwise, talk in their sermon about the 4 different Greek words for love. Yes? Okay. I thought this would land in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So they may have said something like this. Oh, there's these Greek language. Did you know that the Bible was written in Greek? Yeah, okay. Well, in Greek, there's 4 different words for love. And each of them means a different kind of love. So there's philios, which is, and then there's this word storge, which is, and then there's this word eros, and that's, ooh. And then there's agape, and that's just, okay. And this is all complete and total nonsense. This is entirely fabricated. When I was researching this sermon, I tried to figure out where all of that started. And lo and behold, it started in 1960 with our dear old English friend C.S. Lewis. So, yeah. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Four Loves. And then the preachers were off to the races. I never read much C.S. Lewis. By the time I really became a Christian, I was sort of too old for his books about the magical talking animals, and I felt like he was kind of always writing like a church camp version of fiction. But mere Christianity is pretty good. But the reason that preachers love having 4 different words for love in Greek, because it allows them to get out of some very uncomfortable circumstances. It allows them to force the text to conform to their modern culture and sensibilities. In John 11:3, we just heard this. When the sisters write to Jesus about their brother Lazarus, they declare, "Lord, the one whom you love is sick." The one whom you love is sick. And the preachers say, well, that's not love like, that kind of love. That's the Greek word used is philios here. And that's not like a marital type love. It's more like maybe a brotherly love, they say. Except when you actually read the Bible in Greek, the exact same word is used in the book of Titus to describe the love a wife ought to have for her husband. And then in John 13:23 of the same love, it says, the disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining in his bosom. And they say, oh, well, now that love, that's agape, that's this other kind of religious love. And say, except in Ephesians, Paul himself uses that to describe the love a husband is supposed to have for his wife. So 6 different times the beloved disciple is mentioned in John's gospel. And the same Greek words are used to speak about Lazarus, and the same words are used to speak about marriage and marital love and marital affection. So I think the truth about what's going on here, this dance around Greek definitions about this love word that's used for Jesus and Lazarus, this love between them, preachers love to play words with the Greek because they're trying to say this isn't gay. And I've read my Foucault, and I know it is inappropriate to project contemporary same-gender loving relationships onto first-century men in Palestine, but these are the Greek words that are used to describe marriage and marital relationships between 2 men. And so when we mess around with the Greek, I always imagine some language scholar 2000, in the year 4000, reading our newspapers from today and saying, it's strange that they employed all these firemen to run around and start fires all over the place. I don't know so why they do that, They would assume something about the language that is not true. Apologetics, all of this stuff it's like gymnastics, trying to plead the case for any other possible explanation other than the one that's staring you in the face. Jesus loves Lazarus. And we don't need to play games with the language to see this love in action. Jesus lives with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. That's his home. The 4 of them shared a home. I preached a couple of months ago. It's possible that Martha didn't even exist, and Mary of Bethany is actually Mary Magdalene. And so you've got Mary Magdalene, Lazarus, and Jesus sharing a home. And that kind of lines up with the plot. Evidence for this accumulates. When we were in seminary, we were taught about this secret gospel of Mark, which was one of the lost gospels. And then, in that time, I was taught that it was probably a forgery. But today, the evidence is shifting. And that also talks about Jesus and Lazarus. So in this story, Mary and Martha write to Jesus, Lazarus, the one whom you love, is deathly sick. And Jesus returns home, risking his life to be with his beloved. In John's gospel, we have this beautiful, beautiful story about an intentional family, Mary and Martha and Jesus, and they're weeping together. Jesus goes to his beloved's tomb, and expecting to find death there, he weeps and prays, and he weeps. And in his tears, I see 1,000,000 tears being shed into 100,000 names embroidered on a great quilt that spans the length of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And then he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And in this cry, I hear 1,000,000 voices separated from their beloved by the door of a closet, beseeching them to please come out. And the one whom he loved walked out of that deep darkness still wrapped in the clothes of death. And Jesus spoke again and said, "Unbind him and let him go." Well, the shadow of death, it may be around you or me. Some of us, we know the darkness of the inside of a closet. And who put us there? Who laid us in the tomb? Was it the power of the state, some authority, the bigotry of the culture, the society we live in? Was it even our own family and our supposed friends abandoning us? The cry of love and that voice penetrates the stones, and it calls us out. Lazarus, come out. Jesus does not permit his beloved to remain in the closet beneath the shadow of death. And the story of John is extended in the secret gospel of Mark. It follows this story, and it says in the secret gospel of Mark, a great cry heard from the tomb, and going in where the young man lay, Jesus stretched forth his hand and raised him, seizing his hand. And the man, looking upon Jesus, loved him and began to beseech him that he might be with him. And going out of the tomb, they came into the man's house. And after 6 days, Jesus told him what to do. And that evening the man came to him wearing a linen cloth over his body. And the young man remained with Jesus that night, for Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God. End quote. So this is a story about resurrection, but the root of resurrection in this story and through this entire text is liberation, liberation from death and the forces of death and the fear of death. It's a story about liberation, and because it is a story also of marital love, the love of two people who've covenanted. Jesus is refusing to allow Lazarus to remain in that dead place. And because it is a story of liberation between two lovers, it is a story of adoption. And that adoption appears because Lazarus returns this love to Jesus. The beloved disciple goes to Jesus when Jesus himself is beneath the shadow of death. Later still in the gospel, during the horror of the arrest and trial of Jesus, after Jesus is abandoned by Peter and abandoned by his disciples, after Jesus is stripped naked and sentenced to death by the state, after he's humiliated and taken to the place called the skull, the place of death, his body nailed to a Roman cross, and there at the foot of the cross it says only these remained, his mother and Mary Magdalene and the beloved disciple. And Jesus, looking down upon them from the cross, speaks to the beloved disciple from John 19:26. Quote, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. This is the covenant promise, this adoption, this intentional family. Jesus entrusts his mother into the care of his husband. That Mary, the mother of Jesus, would be taken into the home of Jesus' beloved, because that's the way. Jesus knows the way, and Lazarus would, of course, care for his mother-in-law following Jesus' death. David Rankin said that the sum of all theology is love. Love is the power that draws Lazarus out of the tomb. Love from Jesus to Lazarus, and then the love that Lazarus returns to Jesus. It's the force that liberates Lazarus from the closet in the shadow of death, and Lazarus returning this love to Jesus, remaining beside him, staying there after everyone else has fled, and Lazarus taking Jesus' mother Mary into his own home because now she is his mother as well. Love will not permit us to remain in the closet beneath the shadow of death, and the love from others will pull us out of that place. After he had prayed, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out, and you will be unbound and set free." And love knows what it means to see the ones that we love trapped in a closet. You are the light, and you are the voice in the light. and shed your tears and weep if you must. Jesus wept. And then speak. Speak to your beloveds through the stones of the tomb. They can hear you. And when they come out and stand before us, eyes blinking in the clear day of liberation, let us tell the whole world, the whole blessed, broken, and beautiful world, unbind them. Let them go. Amen.